Radio IKIM Inspirasi Fora Islami. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good afternoon to the dear listeners of IKIM FM. Welcome to another episode of Global Muslim Matters, your portal to the world of Muslim affairs across the globe. This show is a collaboration program between IKIM with International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies IAIS Malaysia. And listeners, for today's episode of Global Muslim Matters, we have Mr. Wan Naim Wan Mansor, Research Fellow at IAIS Malaysia in the studio. Assalamualaikum, Mr. Wan Naim.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
It is such a pleasure to have you in the studio. And dear listeners, for today, Mr. Wan Naim is actually going to talk about his previous episode, where it is going to be a continuation from the previous episode where Mr. Wan Naim Wan Mansor talk about unraveling alliances, the Gaza crisis, and Israel's eroding global support. And Mr. Wan Naim, in previous episode, we look at how history and politics have influenced the alliance between Israel and its international allies, especially the US. You have also talked about the recent problems and tensions that have come up in the relationship. So I would like to ask, in the past few weeks, how has the international opinion on Israel changed, especially after the ceasefire on November 24th?
All right, thank you very much for the question. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to express my happiness to be here with IKIM again and
Yes.
with you again,
Mhm.
Miss Patricia,
Yes.
to talk on a very important subject.
Mm.
To date, we have reached almost exactly 2 months since the last 7th of October attack by Hamas,
Mm.
which was unprecedented and which have baffled even the famous intelligence Mossad. And the humanitarian crisis and the catastrophe that been happening to the Palestinians has dominated the headlines for almost 2 months, and it has become so severe that it runs the risk of desensitizing many of us.
Mhm.
So at first, the casualties, the loss of life is 1,000, and then it increased to 5,000, 10,000, and now 20,000 casualties, precious lives has been lost. So sometimes this high amount of numbers can desensitize some of us, and I hope that our ongoing discussion in IKIM as well as the Global Muslim Affairs discussion can help us avoid this desensitizing effect.
Mhm.
So back to the question, I think that's a very important question. But before that, I think I have to talk about a little bit about how Israel relies a lot on public perception
Mhm.
and the support of the global community. So then we can understand more why the change in international opinion on Israel has a very devastating effect to the country.
Mhm.
So first of all, Israel relies a lot on foreign aid. That's well known,
Correct.
but not just in terms of economy, but also military
Mhm.
and also moral support. For instance, Israel's closest ally, the US, have sent 124 billion since World War II,
Mhm.
and Israel has been one of the most received foreign aid from the US, if not the most country. And on average, the US sent about 3.8 billion per year
3.8 billion.
in terms of military assistance
Mhm.
to the Israel, especially under the new 10-year plan
Mhm.
that began in 2016. But recently, the House of Representatives in the US has passed 14.4 billion foreign aid to Israel, but it is still in the process of being approved. It
Mhm.
has to go to other processes like the Senate and
Mhm.
finally the presidential approval.
So you cannot just like pass through just like that.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's why. But interestingly, there's a lot of interesting stuff also happening in the US, but maybe we'll talk about it later.
Mm,
But what I can say at the moment is now that the US itself is currently being divided,
mhm,
uh, and the House of Representatives vote to approve the 14 billion foreign aid is actually very divided. The Republican uh, uh, is the one who proposed the foreign aid and the
mhm.
one supporting it, and the Democrats, it seems in this case, is
Opposing to it.
yeah, opposite to it, and they vote along party lines.
Mhm,
So that's quite an interesting development,
mhm.
because before this, foreign aid to Israel is a bipartisan effort. So they usually agree together despite across party lines.
Mhm.
And also in terms of society, also Israel relies a lot on international support. For instance, Germany and the European Union, because they need the help and the cooperation of these countries to resettle Jewish migrants coming from Europe.
Mhm.
And also in terms of technology, research, and development, and developing their education. So they rely a lot on these European countries.
Mhm.
And in terms of economy, Israel, because it is a small country, it relies a lot on economic activities with other countries. And interestingly, the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement,
Yes.
has affected Israel massively.
Mm.
It is said that Israel is losing 1.4 billion per year due to
1.4.
BDS,
Mm-hmm.
and even 46 drop in foreign direct investments
Mm-hmm.
to Israel. So I think that is why Israel wants to pursue the Abraham Accords with its neighboring Arab countries and maybe other key Arab countries, because Israel depends a lot on the global community's perception and support. So in general, I think Israel is currently experiencing immense pressure, and that's why Israel finally agreed for a ceasefire
Mm-hmm.
for 2 weeks. Although, unfortunately, Israel has recently resumed its indiscriminate bombing attacks
Mm-hmm.
towards civilians.
And we know that the United States has been Israel's main supporter in the international arena, providing diplomatic, military, and also economic assistance. However, some critics say that the US support isn't without conditions and that it comes with certain expectations and demands.
Mm.
So, at the grassroots level, the way Americans support Israel has shown some divisions and differences. We touched a bit before in the previous episode about the evangelical Christians and their narrative, but now some other Christian scholars and groups are using the Bible to question that support. So, what are key developments regarding this, and are there any other groups within American society which are having second thoughts about Israel?
Yes, correct. You have mentioned the evangelist Christian support towards Israel,
Mhm,
and how it has been a very detrimental effect towards the Palestinians, and how actually one of the primary support coming from the US comes from the evangelist Christians.
evangelist Christian.
They have been supporting Israel since inception in 1948,
Mhm,
and until now it has been very strong. It has a very strong lobby
mhm,
towards pro-Israeli policies. However, as I said before, there has been a very interesting development in the US itself. Uh, Foreign policy towards Israel has now being more divided than ever.
mhm,
Just now I mentioned about how the US is currently passing a bill to send $14 billion to Israel,
mhm,
and voting somehow has been across party lines. Before this, is a bipartisan vote. Now it has been partisan, so Democrats are voting uh, across their party lines, and Republicans are the voting across their parties. So I think one of the main reason for this is the development of young generation.
Mm-hmm.
So the coming up of younger generation in US society. One of the polls, the Gallup polls, uh, in a survey, they they have revealed that 26% of Americans do sympathize with Palestinians,
Mm-hmm.
and this is, although it's very small amount, 26%, but
26%.
it is 20-year high actually,
Then previous year,
compared to 20 years
20
back.
years ago.
So it's
Okay.
actually uh, a good trend for the
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians. And also, in a survey by Pew Research, it shows that US adults under 30 years old view the Palestinian people at least more warmly
Mm-hmm.
than the Israeli people at 61% compared to Israeli people only 56%.
Mm-hmm.
And rate the Palestinian government as favorably. I mean, the young people in the US view Palestinian government more favorably at
Mm-hmm.
35% compared to the Israeli government at 34%.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see a clear trend here that the younger population supports have more support to the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met several uh, experts as well coming from the US and the UK in a recent conference, and they say yes, the younger generations, especially those who are tech savvy, they have social media
Mm-hmm.
and TikTok and so
Yes.
forth. They have a more favorable view because maybe
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot more information directly coming from the ground
A lot
compared
more
to
exposure.
a lot more exposure. Yeah, correct.
Yes.
Compared to the one coming from traditional
Mm-hmm.
news outlets that has been maybe censored more than before. So this trend among the young has a lot of impact,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes across dimensions and across layers. We mentioned the evangelist Christians. This trend also affects evangelist Christians as well, because the 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 leadership of the evangelist Christians who have this conservative approach towards Israel
Mm-hmm.
is slowly aging and
Mm-hmm.
being replaced with younger voices.
I see.
And these younger voices, they have a more progressive outlook. They
Mm-hmm.
have more diverse outlook
Mm-hmm.
towards what's going in the Gaza conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And they are more open to new interpretations. So for a long time, Christian evangelists, Zionists, supported Israel based on the Old Testament's description of Israel as God's chosen people and land.
Mm-hmm.
They believed that Israel had a divine right to exist and expand, and that supporting Israel would hasten the second coming of Christ. So they believe that supporting Israel directly related with the second coming of Jesus in Islamic called Isa alayhi salam.
Mm-hmm.
But however, new arguments by New Testament theologians and scholars have recently gained more public attention. As I mentioned before in the previous episode, they claim that the support for Israel should not be unconditional, but contingent on Israel's adherence to God's covenant and the Talmudic laws. And this include being godly, not stealing, no murder, and so
Yes.
on.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there's younger voices in the evangelist Christians. They criticize Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories, its violation of human rights, and its disregard for international law
Mm-hmm.
as contrary to God's will. And they also point out that Jesus taught love and compassion for all people, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of their ethnicity or religion, and this includes the Palestinians also. And the rise of new narratives among Christian scholars has been very important in this regard. They argue that God's promises to Israel in the Old Testament have been fulfilled in Christ and extended to the church,
Mm-hmm.
which is the new Israel. So, according to this new narrative by Christian scholars, also known as covenantal theology,
Covenantal
related to
theology.
covenants,
Mm-hmm.
they say that uh, the covenant related tied to the physical aspect of the world, for example, with the temple in Israel,
Mm-hmm.
is now fulfilled with the coming of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus has now become the temple. So it's become internationalized.
So
So
it's not the
yes,
physical coming of the Jesus itself. It's just that it is being alive. Sorry, it is being portrayed in the temple.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So exactly. So the physical aspect is no longer important, just like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. It has been internationalized, at least from this Christian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And these opinions are based deeply rooted in Christian scripture as
Mm-hmm.
well. And some of the scholars, if I can name them, that supported this new covenantal theology is Gary M. Birch, Stephen Sizer. I met him last week.
Mm-hmm.
He attended a conference on Palestine
Mm-hmm.
uh, at AIS, and also Naim Atik. So these are some of the uh, new scholars, Christian scholars that argue against what evangelists has been uh, providing as their basis of support.
Mm-hmm.
And also because the young generations have becoming more and more prominent, uh, older generations of evangelist Christians are also aging and being replaced. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a new potential change
Or
in how
shift.
evangelists
Mm-hmm.
uh, is changing their position
Mm-hmm.
on Israel and Palestine. Aside from evangelist Christian, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about evangelist Christian.
Mm-hmm.
There are also a shift in conservatives among the U.S., and it's also related with the young trend, the young generational divide, and it is not just generational but also ideological.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the conservatives, although they still support Israel in general,
Mm-hmm.
but the new voices, the younger voices, especially the libertarian leaning conservatives, have more sympathy towards Palestine. So libertarian is people uh, f- uh, emphasizing liberty or freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not actually about the legitimacy of Israel. I mean, conservatives do still believe the legitimacy of the country itself, or maybe the regime itself. I've been saying country, but maybe here I think it's more suitable to say it's a regime, because Malaysia do not actually recognize
Recognize.
the
Yes.
state of Israel. But they these conservatives, they still uh, believe about, they still support the legitimacy of Israel, but they are divided in terms of the responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the responsibility of they themselves helping Israel, the responsibility of the Americans to help Israel. Maybe they believe Israel have a right to exist, but why should Americans support them,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the current state of the country, the economic country? The U.S. is currently having a steep deficit,
Mm-hmm.
so they say that maybe we should help their people first, should help
Yes.
Americans first.
Mm-hmm.
And also we can see in social media even conservative icons like Tucker Carlson,
Mm-hmm.
and also Andrew Tate, a self-proclaimed toxic masculinity icon. He himself has been throwing jabs to Ben Shapiro,
Mm-hmm.
saying that Ben Shapiro is a armchair warmonger. And it's very interesting to see the dynamics changing in the conservative camp as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, I would say there is a clear changing or shift in demography in terms of U.S. support for Israel, and this is largely in part due to the growing of the younger generations, and even among the Jews, the younger Jews, they support human rights in
Mm-hmm.
Palestine. Especially, I mentioned before how the organization Jewish Voice for Peace is very instrumental
Mm-hmm.
in organizing demonstrations in Capitol Hill and elsewhere in the U.S. And also, finally, if I might say this, aside from the increase of youngsters or
Mm-hmm.
younger generations, I would say the increase of diversity in the U.S. also amplifies the voice of pro-Palestinians or maybe
Mm-hmm.
pro-humanitarian voices that is at loggerheads with what Israel is doing right now.
Mm-hmm. So, in a way, we can conclude that, especially in the younger generation, there has been a shift where more and more of these people they are becoming more supportive towards the Palestinians. Especially if you look on the social media, there are a lots of people sharing videos about what has been happening in the Gaza. It is very hard to deny what has been happening there. And going beyond the United States, let's
Mhm.
talk about the rise of
Mhm.
the global south. The global south, especially China, has been increasing its influence and presence in the Middle East. They have become an alternative as they are offering help and partnership with the Palestinians and other groups in the region. Um, in your opinion, what does China think about Israel's aggression towards Palestinians, and what does China interest in that area?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting development in the ongoing crisis between Palestinians and Israel. I think that is one of the unintended consequences of the ongoing conflict. Israel might have the advantage in terms of military might, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of funding,
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of casualty numbers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they have a clear advantage. But one of the unintended consequences of their heavy attacks, heavy killing, murder of civilians is that the US and the West is losing legitimacy in terms of human rights and humanitarian issues.
Mm-hmm.
And this creates a vacuum in which the global south is seen as being filling this gap in terms of human rights and humanitarian championship. So, so before that, maybe I should define what is the global south. Global south is a group of Latin America countries,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow China is also part of it. So
Mm-hmm.
it is seen as a cluster of a group of nations, contrary to the Western countries, and it's more uh, its nature is more developing,
Mm-hmm.
and it is the future of of the world because of the increasing economy
Mm-hmm.
uh, of the global south.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been said that it will be one of the primary contender in terms of superpowers.
So if there's a global south, of course there's also global north.
North, yeah, yeah,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
especially, yeah. So the US and the Western countries are currently being set as the global north.
Mm-hmm.
So they are more, maybe they are more advanced in terms of technology, but global south is catching up quickly,
Mm-hmm.
especially with China being one of the largest economy in the world, and also a lot of other countries in Asia, for instance, Indonesia, Brazil is in other side of the continent.
Mm-hmm.
They are also fast growing economy that will be that will definitely uh, catch up to the more developed country.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of this crisis in Gaza, I think one of the unintended consequences of the humanitarian crisis in which Israel has caused is the rise of the global south, and especially China, because it has shown itself in UN especially as a balanced country
Mm-hmm.
and a respectful country to both sides at the moment. It has close ties with Palestinians, and as well as Israel. And I think so far the statements made by China has been very neutral and maybe a little bit pro humanitarian or pro Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the exchanges I have with a Palestinian scholar, he came to the conference last week at IAIS. He said that the Chinese have a good reputation among Gazans,
Mm-hmm.
and so far, at least, the trust is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And we know how China is very capable in terms of reconstructing or redevelopment. Its construction is like one of the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of opportunity. China have a lot of opportunity to rebuild Gaza, redevelop Gaza, and this is actually one of the centerpiece of Chinese foreign policy,
Mm-hmm.
the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. It is focusing more on development and reconstruction. So that is actually China's expertise, and because they have a very balanced reputation, I think they can exert more influence in the
Mm-hmm.
Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Although maybe as a caveat, I would say some of the obstacles for China to become more influential in the Middle East is the US, because the US still one of the main roadblocks for China to fully uh, involved, and because the US is also still have a lot of historical and cultural ties with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
This is hard to unravel,
Mm-hmm.
and also because maybe China at the moment lack historical and cultural ties. At least from the US, they have evangelicals, Christians, so they have a close tie with Palestine and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But the Chinese maybe less so, and also because maybe China is experiencing criticism itself in terms of uh, other other foreign policies such as the Southeast China, and there's also domestic issues involving Muslims themselves.
Yes. So, in a way, you believe that China has the potential to become the superpower in the region?
Definitely,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm also quoting other scholars saying the same, because they have the capability, they have the reputation,
Mm-hmm.
and also I think China also wanted to expand their influence
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the global scene. So they have these three motivations, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, to become more involved
Mm-hmm.
in the crisis.
And if you look at indiscretion that is happening in Gaza, the indiscriminate and inhuman bombing of civilians, the humanitarian crisis in general, has exposed the growing divide within Israeli society. Different groups in Israel have different feelings about the war and how the government is dealing with it, which is making the split between them even bigger. So, in your view, what are the main reasons for the division and dissatisfaction?
Yes, I know the topic for today is the eroding of global support for Israel.
Mhm.
But actually, I think it's also very important to uh, be aware that within Israel itself, the Israeli people are also losing faith in their government.
Means that the government itself losing support from its citizens.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
not just from the global community, but also from its domestic community.
Mm-hmm.
And this is particularly true because of a lot of impact in terms of primarily, I can say, economy. According to a report by Reuters, Israel is expected to lose 20 billion shekels
Mm-hmm.
uh, throughout the military campaign, and even in the first 3 weeks of the offensive, they have been losing about 100 billion
100
shekels.
billion.
So one shekels is like 1 ringgit, 1.2 ringgit. So it's about the same with Malaysian ringgit.
So 100 billion ringgit.
100 billion in the first 3 weeks, at
Mm-hmm.
200 billion across the campaign, and this is without the participation of foreign armies like Hezbollah and
Mm-hmm.
maybe other militants. So this is just a very optimistic estimate of how much Israel is losing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a lot, and this is like 10% of Israel's domestic gross product.
10%.
Yes, and this is much more than what they are potentially receiving in terms of foreign aid from the US, the 14 billion still yet to be passed, and
Mm-hmm.
the 3.8 billion dollars annually from the US. So they are losing more than what they generate.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's a report, a survey also saying that only 27% of Israelis support Netanyahu, especially after the 7th October attack.
Mm-hmm.
And even more surprisingly, 80% Israelis believes that Netanyahu himself is responsible for not managing Israel's security, for allowing Hamas to enter their borders. And Netanyahu's party, the Likud, is also facing a decline in public support and loss of confidence from its allies and rivals. As I mentioned before, the prime minister is widely blamed for the security and intelligence failures and how Netanyahu manages this war. Many Israelis also accuse him of trying to evade responsibility and accountability for the crisis, and in fact accuses him of exploiting the war to delay his corruption trial and prolong his rule. And the primary rival for Netanyahu is his ultra-orthodox parties, although still coalition partners with Netanyahu. The far-right Yamina, they are increasingly distancing themselves from him and publicly expressing dissatisfaction with his handling of the war. And some of them even consider joining forces with opposition parties, for example, led by Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, to form a new government itself. So, actually, in terms of politics, Netanyahu is actually on a shaky ground. So, we can say that his actions during the war is maybe a symptom of desperation, or maybe just a last resort to cling towards power. And also the issues of hostages. I think it has been a very dividing issue, polarizing issue among Israelis about how Netanyahu has been heavily bombing without uh, without care of the hostages being over there as well. And this has been a source of criticisms towards Netanyahu among Israelis themselves.
And as we are reaching the end of this conversation, looking ahead to Gaza's future, what what obstacles and opportunities exist for achieving a lasting solution?
The support of international community for Israel has always been its primary buttress, or maybe primary underpinning uh, support for Israel. And Israel losing this global support is actually a very momentous shift in terms of its position and how they will react in the future. And although currently the global support is still there, the rising of the younger generations and also the rise of the global south is quickly and swiftly changing these dynamics. And it seems that Israel might have to change its approach towards the Palestinians sooner rather than later. And considering the current circumstances, the future of Gaza looks positive, although the unfortunate loss of casualty, the increasing global support for Gaza, I think, will determine how the future path is going. And if I may end with the role of Malaysia, I think Malaysia has a lot of potential to become a good, very diplomatic force in the region, especially last 2 weeks. I think the Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's visit to Thailand. This is the issue of Gaza has also been one of the focus. Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin of Thailand was reported to thank the Prime Minister for his support in releasing the 20 hostages, Thai hostages in Gaza. And then I think this shows the Malaysia's diplomatic prowess in terms of diplomacy. Malaysia have had a good record in Southeast Asia. Malaysia has been playing a critical role in also related to Thailand. The Patani resistance has been a mediator, and I think because of Malaysia's historical ties and cultural ties with the Middle East, because we are Muslim majority country, we can play a bigger role as a mediator in the Middle East, and maybe uh, expand Malaysia's influence in terms of the Malaysian diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another point I would like to stress is the the future of younger generation. As we mentioned, as we discussed before, the younger generation has been very important in shifting the perception on the especially among Americans, not just evangelist Christians, but also among conservatives. So I think we should also appeal to this younger generation, and maybe uh, get them involved and maybe engage them, and particularly in social media and engagement. I think this some of the platforms that these younger generations are very actively involved.
Mm-hmm. And with that being said, I would like to thank Mr. Wan Naim Wan Mansor, Research Fellow at IAIS Malaysia, for his insight on today's topic, Unraveling Alliances, the Gaza Crisis, and Israel's Eroding Global Support, Part 2. And we hope that today's interview will be beneficial and also inspiring to those who are listening to us either through radio or even through our social media. And again, Mr. Wan Naim, thank you for being with us in the studio. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. It's a